In the early part of the book of Genesis, God chooses Abraham and Sarah out of all the families of the earth to be the conduit of God's blessing to the world. Now, you might expect God to choose a family that was above reproach to be bearers of God's blessings, but they weren't. They were far from perfect. In fact, so far from perfect, I don't think anyone would have been surprised if at any point God had said, done with them, I'm going to find somebody else. So we're going to be hearing a little bit of their story. Really, it's a story about Abraham and Sarah's grandsons, Esau and Jacob. And you'll see what I mean by them being a little less than the perfect family. So let's listen for the word of God for us today from Genesis chapter 27. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called his elder son Esau and said to him, "My son?" And he answered, "Here I am." He said, "See, I am old. I don't know the day of my death. So then take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out in the field and hunt some game for me. Then prepare for me savory food, such as I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may bless you before I die." Now Rebekah was listening. Rebekah, by the way, was Isaac's wife. Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me game and prepare for me savory food to eat, so that I may bless you before the Lord before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my word as I command you. Go to the flock and get me 2 choice kids, so that I may prepare them savory food for your father, so that I may prepare from them savory food for your father, such as he likes. And you shall take it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies.' But Jacob said to his mother Rebekah, 'Look, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a man of smooth skin. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him, and bring a curse on myself and not a blessing.' His mother said to him, 'Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my word and go get them for me.' So he went and got them and brought them to his mother. And his mother prepared savory food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of her eldest son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. And she put the skin of the kids on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. Then she handed the savory food and the bread that she had prepared to her son Jacob. So he went into his father, and he said, 'My father.' And he said, 'Here I am. Who are you, my son?' And Jacob said to his father, 'I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, so that you may bless me.'" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So the story continues on from there. Isaac indeed blesses Jacob, a little confused because at one point he says, "You sound like Jacob, but you feel like my son Esau." So Isaac finally decides it must be Esau, and so he asks God to give his son an abundance of wealth, power over nations, and what must have seemed like a knife in the heart of Esau when Esau heard about it. He made Jacob, whom he thought was Esau, lord over his brothers. In fact, he actually talked about how his brothers would bow down to him. Now, earlier in the book of Genesis, Jacob tricks Esau into trading his birthright for a bowl of soup. Now, Jacob has clinched that birthright truly for himself. You see, his inheritance wasn't just Jacob's blessing, asking God to make these things happen for him. The birthright of the firstborn son, both for the money and the property, was double what the inheritance would be what the inheritance would be for all the other sons. So was Esau angry when he heard about this? You bet he was. And who could blame him? And then, of course, there is Rebekah, a mother who clearly had favorites and who was willing to stick it to one son so the other son could have everything. And before I forget, Esau went out and married two Hittite women who weren't exactly favorites of the in-laws. I believe the text says that they were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. So I guess you could say that as people of faith, we come from one very dysfunctional family. How does your family compare? Is it more functional than the faith family we come from? Do you have the perfect family? Everyone get along, no conflict? My family isn't perfect. I've got two brothers, and while we love each other, we've certainly had our moments when we didn't get along, not just as kids, as adults too. We're also not like those families that have the annual family reunion that everybody just looks forward to coming to. We don't call each other every day or every week, or if I'm really to be honest, every 6 months. I come from a family where it's always somebody else's responsibility to initiate a phone call. I remember when I was in college, I was visiting my grandmother, and she got on my case for not calling often enough. And I was just snarky enough to say, well, the phone works both ways. Wasn't very well received, I guess. Probably not a big surprise there. I loved my grandmother. But my family just doesn't talk on the phone much. There has certainly been times when I have looked at other families that always seem to be hanging out together and doing things together and loving it. And there was a time where that saddened me. It's like, how come I can't have a family like that? But the reality is that's not who we are. We love each other, but it's just not who we are. It took me a long time to be okay with that. The reality is there's no such thing as a perfect family. Even the most perfect family on the outside has its struggles and has its issues. That's why I love these stories from Genesis about our faith family of origin. I mean, why in the world would we ever expect our families to be perfect when we come from one of the most dysfunctional families there ever was? And yet God looked at Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and even Jacob and said, I choose you. Now, I have two theories why God chose Abraham and Sarah and their family. First theory is no one is perfect. So it's not like God had a choice between a perfect family and an imperfect family, so why not Abraham and Sarah? My second theory is that God chose a dysfunctional family because if God had chosen a perfect family where everyone always got along, no one did anything rash or harmful or stupid, then how could the rest of us ever live up to that example? We would always be falling short. So why even try? I mean, if we're never going to be as good as they are, then you also have to wonder, well, will God love us if we aren't as good as them? Will we be kicked out of the family? What I've come to see is that God doesn't have a problem with imperfect families. God knows that's who we are. God is much more interested in how we live together and how we work on those imperfections than with whether or not we're perfect. So I've come to see that our families are where we practice living our faith. It's where we learn to forgive. It's where we learn what love is. It's where we learn humility and we learn how to serve others. It's the training ground for learning to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. Let's look at Jacob and Esau for a minute. Esau was ready to kill Jacob, understandably so. and Jacob knew it. So he ran away. He actually ran to another country to live with his uncle. He was gone for a very long time. While he was with his uncle, he got married twice, and he had 12 kids. But Jacob was a schemer, and his cousins figured out he was cheating their father, and thus them too. And so Jacob ran away again. This time, he actually went back home, but with great trepidation. Because remember, Esau was going to kill him the last time he was there. You can read the rest of the story in Genesis about what actually happened, but to make a long story short, when Esau saw Jacob, he ran to him and hugged him. Somewhere in those intervening years, Esau learned to forgive. He learned that family relationships were precious even when they weren't perfect. And he welcomed his brother, schemer though he knew he was. So many people spend so much time looking for the perfect family, whether it's their nuclear family, their church family, or a family of their own making. But there is no such thing, because we are all imperfect human beings. We all struggle with doing the right thing. We all have broken relationships. We get jealous. We can be short-sighted or short-tempered with each other. We get our feelings hurt. We pout. We don't always react well. Now, strangers, for the most part, when we're behaving that way, will just pull away from us. I mean, they aren't invested in us. They really don't care if we grow into being a better human being, because they can just walk away. But family's different. It's only with family, with those who are committed to each other, regardless of how badly we behave, that we learn how to love. We learn how to forgive. We learn how to be humble. We learn how to live together for the common good. Now, I know that not everyone has experienced that kind of learning opportunities in their nuclear family. Remember what I said about all of us having a level of dysfunction in our families? Well, some families, it is downright toxic and abusive, and there are definitely times when leaving is the right thing to do. Prioritizing our physical, mental, and spiritual well-being is the right thing to do. No one should stay in an abusive relationship. And there are times, really, when the best thing is to cut it off. But those are the exceptions. That's not how we should be as a general rule. If that is your situation, then ask yourself, who is my family? It may not be your family of origin. It may not be your nuclear family. It may be a family of friends you have gathered around you and made family. So when we're talking about how we live together with those we love, that's a family too. And the church is a family. It's one of the threads that weaves through the New Testament, especially in Paul's letters. We may not have been born to the same parents, but we're family because we're God's children. And Paul even talks about being adopted into the chosen family of God, the family of Abraham and Sarah. So I guess every time we baptize somebody, we should probably say, welcome to the most dysfunctional family on earth. We will fail you. We will not always be our best, but we love you. And we will love you even when you aren't at your best. And we will continue to love you because we're family. Maybe I'll try that out at the next baptism. By the way, if you don't know from your personal experience how dysfunctional churches can be, read Paul's letters. He talks about conflict in the church all the time. But he's also the first one there, and he's ready to guide Christians through that conflict. He's willing to work with them to overcome it and to build each other up, because He recognizes that as imperfect as we are called together for a purpose. And so he talks about how do we deal with conflict between individuals? How do we deal with conflict that threatens the community? He talks about how to listen to each other and how to move past disagreements. Because for him, family, and especially the church family, should not be so easily broken up because it's God who brings us together. Which means that the church, when we are at our best, is also where we learn how to forgive. It's where we learn to grow through our failures. It's where we learn what love is, which, by the way, isn't an emotion, it's a choice, it's an act, it's a way of life. And this church family is where we learn to build each other up, even and maybe especially when we aren't at our best. But you see, we can only do that if we don't run away. We can't do what Jacob did and just run away when things get tough. If we leave every time things get tough, if we leave every time there's a conflict, and I'm not talking just about the church family, I'm talking about your own families. If we run away every time we get our feelings hurt, then when will we ever stop running? And what would we lose out on? I look at my own family in this case. My family has a history that actually goes back generations of cutting people off when there's a conflict. In fact, my mother's cousin was cut off from the family when he was about 6 years old, he and his dad. There was some kind of a conflict around that, and I actually suspect they had more to do with grief because his mother, the favorite daughter, had just died. But for decades, there was literally no contact between my mother's cousin and the whole rest of the family. In fact, at one point, I remember my mom talking about him, and we really weren't even sure where he was or if he was still alive. That's how cut off we were. Well, now fast forward to 50, and it might even have been 60 years or so after that event. My mom's cousin tracked down his aunt, my grandmother, and sent her a letter. And my grandmother was paralyzed. She didn't know what to do. In fact, she called my mom and she said, "I got this letter. What should I do?" And my mom said, "Well, open it." Well, she finally did open it. And the next, there was a phone call. And then finally, he came to visit. And it was such a gift for her in her final years to have a relationship with her sister's son, with her nephew. But imagine what they lost out on. We found out that he didn't even have a picture of his mother. And so my grandmother was able to share that with him. I happened to be in Florida a number of years ago where he lived for a conference, and I thought, well, I'm going to meet this part of the family I've never met before. So we arranged to get together, and I was expecting dinner with him and his wife and one of his daughters, but when I showed up, I was inundated with about 25 people who were excited to meet somebody from this other side of the family that they knew absolutely nothing about. And it was just a really, really cool family reunion there. But again, imagine what we all lost out on because of some conflict that no one really even remembers the details of, and that my great-grandparents were not willing to work through. Over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking specifics about how we learn to forgive, how we work through conflict, how we learn to listen to each other, how we learn to work together for the common good, even if we aren't all on the same page, how to stick together through thick and thin, not just in our church, but in our family relationships, nuclear and family of origin as well. When we learn to do those things with the people who are important to us, it changes us for the better, and it strengthens the bonds between us. Family is a gift from God. It is not perfect, but it is a gift where we can grow into our better selves and then be our best in the world. So be sure not to miss the next 3 weeks. We're going to be getting concrete about all of these things. And I hope you will find at the end of it a better appreciation for how hard it can be to be family to each other sometimes, but also a better appreciation for the opportunities to heal and strengthen your family relationships. Let's pray. Thank you for family, God, even the ones we don't like and the ones who try our patience. Sometimes that's us. We are not perfect. No one is. So help us learn to love each other, to support each other, to forgive each other, and to bless each other, so that we might be a blessing to others. Amen.